Hello, welcome everybody to this Real Estate Live session. Real Estate Live is a week of free events focused on economic development, regeneration and inward investment, and trying to keep the conversation going around those issues at this tricky time. Today we've got a great panel here that you can see on screen with me. They're going to be talking to you in a minute, but just before we do that, I'm going to kick off a poll. This poll is something that we've been running in all of our sessions this week, and we will put the results together at the end of the week. You can see it on your screen. It says, what is the most important factor in unlocking development and ensuring the continued strength of UK real estate? So take your choice, tick your boxes, and we'll see. We'll bring you the results at the end, and we will, as I say, add them all together and produce a result at the end of the week. Thanks for your time on that. Also, just before we get going, I just want to say that we are launching today a report from a roundtable that we held on this very subject, the report on the impact of proposed planning reforms on garden communities. A link to that report is going to be posted into the chat, and there it is, as if by magic. And that report you can read while you're watching this session, or you can read at your leisure. Enjoy it. And perhaps it will give you some ideas for some questions later on. When you do post questions, and I'm sure you will, please use the Q&A function down at the bottom and post your questions, and then our chair will pick them up and ask them of the panelists. On the matter of our chair, I will now hand over to her. She is Emma Shone. Emma, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ross. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us in this panel on the importance of infrastructure in a new world. As Ross said, my name is Emma Shone. I am the news editor at Property Week. Over the next hour, myself and my esteemed panel are going to look at this moment, the government is sort of looking at its infrastructure spending and cooking up plans. So we're going to talk about what its priority should be when it comes to creating garden communities. We're also going to discuss what the key projects are in the southeast and how they can benefit their wider geographies. So without further ado, I am joined this afternoon by Ian Piper, the Chief Executive of Ebbsfleet Development Corporation, who I believe are also shortlisted for one of our Resi Awards. Nice one. Bryan, the CEO of the Southeast Local Enterprise Partnership, Jeremy Potter, Spatial Planning Services Manager at Chelmsford City Council, and Stephen Dance, who is a Chartered Surveyor, Director of the Commercial Advisor Team, Infrastructure and Projects Authority, and also a Non-Executive Director of the Estuary Growth Board. I'm sure you know the drill, but just to confirm the format for the session, I'm going to put some questions to the panel, but we are going to open up to questions a little later, so do pop those in the Q&A box as we go. So we'll get stuck in. Adam, I'd like to start with you, if possible, please. And could you just sort of give us an idea, what are the infrastructure and transport projects taking place in the Southeast LEP region at the moment, and how do they feed into the garden communities that are planned?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for including me today. I think just musing on that from a Southeast LEP perspective, I suppose there's a cadre of big projects that we aren't necessarily directly linked with, and then there's a cadre of other projects that we are. I think we're fortunate in our patch, and the Southeast LEP patch really is Essex, Kent, and East Sussex, to be the host or the future host of some major investments that are going to make a major impact to the way that we live. Whether that's Ebbsfleet, as we'll talk about today with Ian, the Lower Thames Crossing, and what that's going to do to unlock growth and development across Essex and Kent and create a new economy between the two counties. And those projects and other projects we've actually pulled together in a major projects group across the Southeast LEP area to really discuss those opportunities and what they can all bring. So where can we have a conversation around supply chains? Where can we have a conversation around skills needs for those big developments? There are also new nuclear in Essex at Bradwell, plans for London Resort in North Kent as well. And the garden community story across our patch is more impressive than I think certainly any other LEP area in the country and most other parts of the country, when we consider that it accounts for about a third of the stated ambition across the whole country. Supporting that, my organisation over the past few years has invested in a range of projects which really should play their part in contributing to the success of garden communities. So we've pledged over £12 million, for example, to Bewley Park Station in Chelmsford, which will be a big boost for plans around North East Chelmsford and its development. And similarly, there are growth area schemes in our major towns and across the South East SELEP area. We also recognise it's important to invest in the skills that are needed to help deliver this kind of scale of development. So over £6 million in an engineering design and design growth and enterprise hub in Kent, and a construction centre at Chelmsford College, indeed, are two things that we've invested in that we recognise as being very important. And then when we look further down the line, we're also investing in Thanet Parkway Railway Station in Kent, which is a good example of a project which at the moment doesn't directly sit next door to a garden community, but it goes without saying that will play a big role in helping unlock development in that part of Kent as things develop over the coming years. The closest link, I guess, between infrastructure in the patch and garden communities, I think we'll cover today. You know, the impact of the Lower Thames Crossing in both counties and beyond will be huge, and I'm sure Ian will talk later about the impact on Ebbsfleet, and certainly the funding package that has come together around developments in Chelmsford. So the Housing Infrastructure Fund money, as well as the SELEP money supporting those transport improvements across the city, will be transformative there as well. The last thing I'll say, because I know I've got to keep it to 3 minutes, which would be some kind of world record for me, is really we're doing what we can to really bring developers across what is quite a big let patch together to share in the conversation that we continue to have around directing our investment in the right place. So going back some years, we would have had a conversation across our board, and that's, you know, local authority partners as well as some strategic businesses about, you know, where we should target investment. But being acutely aware of everything I've already mentioned, we know that, you know, the role of developers, the opinion of developers is really important. So we've got county-based development groups in each of the core counties of the LEP, and they come together across a SELEP-wide housing and development group, which really plays a key role in being able to sort of, you know, recognise those opportunities, sort of jump on those opportunities, and really advise us as to where we need to play a role moving forward and where we should target future investment. And those levers are going to be really important. So our important conversation at the moment is really, you know, what role the LEP in the future, and, you know, what funding do we have available to us to sort of execute those our responsibilities and make the best use of the knowledge that we've accumulated through the groupings that I've just mentioned.
Absolutely. And what, just quickly, do you think the LEP's role is going to evolve into in the future?
I think that there's been a lot of chat, I think, over the last couple of years about UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which would, I guess, you know, you could look at that as being a continuation of local growth fund as was. I think it's vital for LEPs to have a stewarding role in UK SPF in the way that we have with local growth fund, because I think that gives us a certain degree of authority. Really important that we really sort of take full advantage of those collaborations that we've managed to pull together over the past few years, and that we bring those expert voices to the fore, because I think, you know, the closer that we are to those funding routes, the more we're able to really take advantage of investment that's coming from other places as well. And I think we've positioned ourselves perfectly to do that.
Brilliant, thanks, good answer. Jeremy, let's come to you. Could you just tell us a little bit about what the current infrastructure focus is in Chelmsford, and what the opportunities and challenges are that you're facing around that?
Okay, yes. So good afternoon, everyone. As you all know, I mean, Chelmsford is located in the heart of Essex. It's England's newest city, has a population of over 170,000 people. About 2/3 of them live in the city. And mainly due to its accessible and well-connected location and a good employment and retail offer, Chelmsford has been growing rapidly, with around about 1,000 new homes on average being built every year. So essentially, we have adopted our new local plan very recently, and that continues the growth to 2036, and it provides nearly 22,000 new homes in that period, and about 150,000 square metres of employment and retail space. But really importantly and more pertinent for this is that we've got a new garden community at North East Chelmsford, and that counts for about 10,000 of those new homes and about half of the employment for the whole of our area. And that new community is actually underway. Permission has been granted for about 4,000 new homes, over 4,000. About 1,000 new homes have been built, and some of that community infrastructure is in place already. So neighbourhood centres, primary, secondary school, they're already built and open. So we're in a good place in relation to some of those community type infrastructure. So really, our example of our new garden community is served by bus-based rapid transit with dedicated bus lanes going into the city centre. So that's a really important part of the infrastructure that we are looking at and making sure that it's extended when the development grows. But as Adam pointed out, the two really big bits of strategic infrastructure is a new railway station to serve the new garden community, and a new bypass. And the new bypass is the only really bit of road that we're proposing in terms of infrastructure. Everything else is mainly focused on sustainable transport, active travel, all of those elements, cycling, walking, micro-mobility.
And how important is sustainability when pulling these sort of infrastructure plans together?
Well, it is crucial, really. Very on in the process of working out what we needed to do in Chelmsford, we knew that apart from, as I say, the new bypass, there'd be very little opportunity to build new roads. The existing urban network of roads reaches about 96% capacity at peak. So there's very little capacity in the existing road network. So our approach has always been focused on active travel infrastructure, so cycling and walking. We've had a growth package, which was £15 million worth of growth package, supplemented by planning obligations from developments, to actually produce and deliver a whole series of new cycleway links, new crossings, really focusing on walking, cycling, and micromobility really as the driving factor of new infrastructure. And the station obviously is going to be a really big key part of that. As Adam said, we've been really lucky in actually securing £217 million of HIF funding towards the new station and the new bypass, in addition to the funding that we got from SELEP, the 12 million, and funding from the Countryside Properties, who are the developers. So it's a kind of a portfolio of funding from public and private sector to bring forward some of these big schemes. Yeah.
Very
so
important.
Absolutely, really important. And I mean, I think we've had a good record in delivering infrastructure through Section 106 agreements, and SIL, which we've had in place in Chelmsford since 2014. So we've been delivering that kind of education, community infrastructure, and that will continue. But I think really the challenges and opportunities going forwards really will be really focused upon, well, they're both challenges and opportunities. Addressing climate change is going to be one of the big things for us, and that's going to be for everyone. I think the way in which you can lever in money is having a long-term strategic plan that's deliverable and in place with up-to-date infrastructure planning, actually knowing what infrastructure is required when and where to accompany new growth, and then joining up infrastructure providers and agencies to enable that growth to happen. And I think, as I said previously, it's a real partnership approach. In Chelmsford, I think our success has been down to the public and private, so developers, the councils, Essex County Council, because we're a two-tier authority, and infrastructure providers working together on a shared strategy, so we know what the strategy is. There's certainty for all of those groups to take risk in sometimes, and to put resource in to make some of this infrastructure really happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jeremy. Some really key points there. Ian, I'd just like to come to you now. Hello. How important has the infrastructure been in the plans at Ebbsfleet? Obviously, it's very central to it. So could you just tell us a bit about that and sort of the challenges that you faced doing that and how you overcame them or are overcoming them?
Hi, Emma. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for having me this afternoon. Yeah, so the vision for Ebbsfleet Garden City is to create up to 15,000 new homes and 30,000 new jobs. And for anybody that doesn't know the area, this is all planned in former chalk quarries. So the landscape was very challenging, and there was little infrastructure there to support that type of development. So infrastructure delivery has been hugely important. I don't think you'd be surprised to hear me say that. But I think one of the things I would stress is that when delivering and planning a community of that sort, you need to think about infrastructure in quite a broad sense. So in some of the aspects of infrastructure that we've been involved with and we've supported, it's everything from boosting the electricity capacity in the area. There just wasn't enough electricity in the network, so we had to work with the power companies to solve that. Because that's a regulated industry, and that is one of the challenges that you face when you're trying to deliver a wide range of industry. The regulated industries bring a different sort of complexity to it. We had to develop quite an innovative model for that, how we were going to fund it, and probably more particularly how we were going to get our money back from the developers that would then tap into that electricity supply. So get yourself some clever lawyers, but I think learn from each other as well. I'm a great believer that we shouldn't be reinventing the wheel all the time, and so I think it's really important that as public bodies we learn from each other, tap into each other's knowledge. As in the early days of the Development Corporation and the early days of the development, there was a lot of emphasis on that sort of core strategic service type infrastructure. So whether that's roads, electricity, as I say, water supply, etc. But as you move through and you have to, and you then take on, as we are now, a different emphasis on more social infrastructure. As Jeremy has just said, the range of things that you're required to deliver and support is really quite vast. So, you know, schools, you would think that getting schools funded in this day and age is relatively straightforward. I discovered it's not at all. So you've got all sorts of different models of schools, centrally funded, locally funded, trusts, etc. So it's actually quite a complex environment, some supported by Section 106s, some not. So every piece of infrastructure, whether it's a school, a community centre, cycleways, walkways, all have their sort of complexities, and it's a very complicated jigsaw. One of the challenges in there, I think, is determining the optimum funding approach to it. In some instances, it's not appropriate for the public sector to invest, and sometimes it's appropriate to put in some forward funding, whereby, as we did with the electricity, we overcome the barrier of the need is now, but the development won't come forward. So how do you forward fund it? That's fairly tried and tested these days. And of course, in some instances, it needs what you might have referred to in the past as gap funding or grant. You know, it just does not work without some public subsidy. So finding the optimum balance of funding is usually very important and can be quite challenging, particularly when you're working with regulated bodies and such like.
I think it's interesting you talk about that sort of jigsaw of bringing together these different vital pieces of the infrastructure. Would you say that they are as complicated as they need to be, or could it be simplified in some way?
I certainly feel that some parts of it could be simplified. I mean, I mentioned the school situation, and I was quite surprised at quite how complicated that landscape has become. So yeah, you have trusts that are private organisations. They're sometimes competing with each other to run schools. You have centrally funded schools through DFE, and then you have sort of more locally controlled and locally funded schools. So it is quite a complicated network. And then you get into the whole situation of are there enough children in the area to support a two-form entry school at the right time? And we've had issues with that where the data said that there wasn't enough, so schools have got delayed. Well, actually, the people that have already moved in want their school now. So yeah, it is just something that you might think is quite simple, like delivering. I think we've got 7 primary schools to deliver over the Garden City. There's a lot of complexity there involving a lot of different partners, but that's why I think you need, and in our situation, you've got a development corporation that brings specialist expertise to unlock all of those sorts of issues and really focus on them.
Absolutely, I think that's really important. Thank you, Ian. And on this point, should we bring in the civil servant? Stephen, let's come to you. And could you just tell us a bit about the infrastructure plans for the Thames Estuary and what impact those are going to have on the communities around it?
No, of course, I'm not allowed to say anything, Emma. You know that. But
I will
just say, I will just say, sorry for those that are listening. I do work for the Infrastructure and Projects Authority for the Chancellor and Minister for the Cabinet Office. So obviously can't divulge stuff that may or may not come out in spending reviews. What I want to say, and clearly, people have talked so far in this discussion about some of the really big infrastructure projects, Lower Thames Crossing, the nuclear energy plants, etc., together with actually some of the more granular developments that Ian is talking about in relation to Ebbsfleet, whether that's social infrastructure like schools or utilities, electricity, or some of the bigger transport related stuff on the road junctions. Clearly, all of that has to come together. It doesn't always, between national and local planning and local delivery. What I want to say though is that 3 things I think sort of really start to define how we should be thinking about places and big places, big regions like the Thames Estuary, and there are other places around the UK as well that would be thinking in similar terms. One, I think, is around connectivity, and we've always thought about that as being transport, rail and roads. The rail of the future and the roads of the future may look very different. They may take freight and cars on roads, but are very likely to be not petrol and diesel driven vehicles, and maybe not even having drivers in them. And digital connectivity is set to become just as important, I think, as road and rail connectivity. And in fact, the fact that we're having this seminar like this today is some indication, even if it doesn't all survive the pandemic, of the way in which digital communication is really important. And we've talked a bit about net zero and environmental net gain. Well, a lot about net zero, little about environmental net gain. The quality of development, the quality of stuff that goes on around the infrastructure is going to be key. And that's what people, including ministers, really want to see. They want to see high quality development where people can live and work and play and have their leisure time together. And I think that leads on to the question of what our places are going to look like. If they're going to be places where people work and live and have leisure time, and that's all close together so that we don't actually put quite so much pressure on the transport networks and all schlepping up to London because London is the only place to work and you have to go up there day in, day out. Is that really going to be how we want to work and need to work in the future? Of course, the lights have to stay on. We need energy. Big questions about how we generate energy using renewable sources. And we need social infrastructure, the hospitals, the schools, and you've seen the Prime Minister make announcements on both hospitals and schools in the recent past, and indeed on the economic infrastructure to support. And then finally, I couldn't, being a sort of Treasury type official, let the moment pass without mentioning the money. And that is a combination of public capital, and public capital is going to be scarce. I mean, we know public capital is going to be scarce. There's no point in sort of burying your head in the sand and saying, yeah, we can, it's great, we can splurge out, because we have to think about how we apply that public capital to leverage the most economic benefit that we can. And that means investing it smartly alongside and in conjunction with where we are expecting private capital to invest and enterprise to invest for the future. So thinking about all of those things, I think it's a bit of a strategic set of thoughts, I think will help us drive the right set of investment decisions, both nationally and locally.
And those right set of decisions, is that going to see more onus put onto private developers to deliver these communities?
Good question. The truth is I don't know, Emma. I think there's always been an emphasis on private development to deliver communities. When we last built a new town, which was in, I think, 1968 with Milton Keynes, it was developed something like 50% public capital and 50% private. Ian will know the numbers now for Ebbsfleet, which isn't yet of the Milton Keynes style and size. But nevertheless, it relies a lot on public enterprise to deliver the right outcomes. And in a sense, that's what I mean about putting public capital alongside. If you can get the public capital to invest in the right thing, and that may or may not be a big road or a big railway, or it may be better digital infrastructure, or it may be better environmental credentials or net zero, it's enabling the private sector to come along and deliver a high quality product.
Yeah, absolutely. And is there any concern, obviously going forward, the public purse has taken a bashing too with the ongoing COVID situation, but if we're obviously relying on that private capital coming through, landlords across the country are struggling to bring in rent. And so that obviously there's the question of the recession. Is there any concern that private capital is not going to be as easily accessible as it was in, say, 1968 when Milton Keynes was coming through?
Interesting. I wouldn't say that is the major concern at the moment. I would say there are quite a few questions about the types of development and viability and what one needs to do to think about building the flexibility and the adaptability of schemes, particularly in the commercial world, frankly, to be viable. I don't really feel the same will apply and does apply to the creation of new settlements and the garden cities network, etc. I think those challenges are pretty much what they've always been and will remain what they are, which is joining up local infrastructure, national infrastructure, housing, and the social requirements into a package that brings everything to bear.
Okay. And one final question with your Treasury hat on for now, and then we'll open up to wider debate and questions. I just wanted to ask, with the government sort of bringing forward its spending review at the moment, how high up the list of priorities are garden communities?
You know I'm not going to answer that, don't you?
I've got to ask. I've got to give it a go.
It's a good question. I think, and you can see from the way in which the Prime Minister has made his comments and the Chancellor has made his comments, that they feel they can consider infrastructure to be a really important set of investments. You're not going to invest in infrastructure just to move goods and services around or just to keep the lights on. You're investing in infrastructure because it's part of the package for UK development, and that includes new settlements, and it includes garden cities and garden villages, and getting a really high quality set of developments. And the Secretary of State for MHCLG, Robert Jenrick, has sort of come out talking about high quality development and the aspects of beauty, which I don't think I've heard a minister talk about for quite a long time. And so it is clearly going to be part of the mix, but I'm not going to sort of say, oh, well, garden villages are the top of the priority list over hospitals and schools or other parts of the infrastructure network. They are clearly part of the mix. They are also longer term. It takes quite a long time to plan and deliver a set of settlements, And hopefully we will be in a very different set of economic circumstances at the time that we really need to, press the button on those in a big way.
And when's that going to be?
Goodness only knows. You tell me. Property Week can be the first to tell us all what the economic forecast is for the future.
Sure. And let's have a chat about the other sort of big government thing that the property sector has its eye on at the moment, which is, of course, the government's long-awaited planning white paper, which has put forward some really interesting reforms. I just want to start by touching on something you said, Jeremy, about the role that Section 106 and SIL payments have played in your projects. The proposals include some changes to those systems. How do you feel about them? Do you think they're going to be as effective in the proposed way?
I have got some serious reservations about the proposals on the infrastructure delivery in the white paper. I'm not saying that the existing system is perfect, far from it. The time it spends sometimes to negotiate Section 106 agreements is a real issue. However, I think now, from a local authority's perspective, having a situation whereby contributions to infrastructure is going to be coming downstream at some point in time, when and not knowing exactly when the actual amount that we will, local authority would be getting, because it's based upon a formula, viability, those sorts of aspects, not actually on the cost of infrastructure that's required to bring forward a development, does raise some pretty serious concerns with myself, and many local authorities are mirroring those thoughts. It's the risk. I know that the white paper talks about the potential for borrowing against future receipts. However, the risk is placed on the local authority to deliver that. And also, in terms of developers, I've had developers say to me that actually infrastructure that is required, in a timely way, upfront, potentially to unlock sites, they don't necessarily want that infrastructure to be within the control of the local authority. They want to be able to do that in kind themselves. Now, I think probably what we will get is something much more nuanced than what's in the white paper, because I think practically we have to. In-kind infrastructure delivery will always be part of the mix of infrastructure to bring forward sites. It's just, I think, if you read it to the letter, it sort of kind of implies that affordable housing is the only thing that might be able to be provided in kind. There's very little on the provisions elsewhere. So I think, the jury's definitely out, and the devil is always in the detail of these things, which we'll be very carefully poring over when we see them.
Yeah, I'm sure. Ian, would you agree with what Jeremy said there?
Well, I suppose I'm either in the fortunate or unfortunate position that when Ebbsfleet Development Corporation was established in 2015, something like 12,500 of the 15,000 residential units already had an outline consent. So their Section 106 contributions were largely already established. It's meant to some extent that we can be slightly watching the debate about the white paper from a sort of slightly different position. What I am sort of reminded of, though, is that I remember very clearly the discussions that went on around Kate Barker's review of contributions. Goodness me, Stephen might remind me of when that was, but it seems quite a long time ago now. And out of that was born SIL. And I remember very clearly saying that the whole purpose of that was to create certainty and a simplification of the system, so that developers, when they were buying sites and in the market, had a much clearer idea of what they would be contributing. And the only, I think, sort of planning gain that was going to be outside of that was affordable housing. Well, as it turned out, it didn't produce a simplified or a clear system at all. We ended up with both Section 106 and SIL, and in many respects, you could say a more complicated system. So I think that would be one of my messages. If the government is going to alter the system again, simplicity and clarity are the things that I think both public sector and private developers usually cry out for. So I think that should be something that is sort of front and centre, and that would be my plea.
Okay, and Adam, can you give us sort of a wider view from a LEP's perspective on that planning white paper and how you think it's going to impact these infrastructure plans going forward? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing?
I mean, I think we're a couple of steps removed from it in many ways, but I'd reiterate the point that Ian said at the end there, but also that, you know, the role that we're trying to play in bringing developers closer together and bringing them closer to local authorities than perhaps they've been before, I think becomes even more important in the context of what's happened with, you know, the content of the white paper. So I guess we're in a position, a slightly different position, a sort of helicopter position of being able to look down and sort of, you know, see what that might mean. But I think, you know, collaboration across this agenda, being, I guess, looking across what else might happen in terms of sort of linking back to some of the things that Stephen was saying across, you know, future investment in growth generally. You know, how does that all stitch together? You know, what is the role of organisations like mine? You know, whatever happens, I think it's just about making sure that the dialogue between all the key components of the conversation is stronger than it's been before. I think we're fortunate in this part of the world to have, you know, a cadre of investments planned that look like they're all going to happen. They will all have a positive transformative effect in this part of the world. And I think we all recognise that, you know, we've got a role to play in what should still be quite an exciting conversation generally.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to pick up on something you said there, Adam, you touched on the relationship between local authorities and developers and all those parties that are bringing these forward. How important is collaboration between those parties?
I mean, we certainly, you know, we'd struggle to land any of our ideas, anything that the LEP wanted to do without having everybody that I've just mentioned on board. You know, it's in a situation where investment from the centre has to reduce, where the relationships with the private sector are more and more important, where the success of developments such as Ebbsfleet becomes an even more important part of the economic makeup of the area. You know, that collaboration, the strength of that collaboration is absolutely critical to us being able to move forward and do anything tangible and impactful in the area.
Absolutely. And Jeremy and Ian, you are clearly collaborating. So how's that going? How's that working out for you?
I can come in. I mean, I think you know, it's working well. I mean, you know, there's always going to be certain tensions, but I mean, I think in general terms, if you have a collaborative approach with developers, you will be able to get your plans through more easily because you've got supportive developers that can actually support that process. So when you are at an examination, when some of the more difficult things and more technical things about sites come forward, if you've got a developer on board who can really sort of help and be collaborative with the local authority to prove that that site is deliverable, that is really important in the first place. But then just ongoing, so in Chelmsford's case, and I'm sure this is the case for many of the government communities, there's delivery boards. The delivery board is a partnership of the developer and developers, the councils, Homes England, those bodies that need to actually collaborate to make things happen. So I would see the successful places as being the places that really, you know, really do collaborate and are shown to actually, there's some output in that collaboration in tangible sense. So getting things built and getting the infrastructure on the ground is really important. Just one other thing that I'd just like to pick up on in terms of the planning white paper. I think infrastructure planning, the NPPF and the other items of government guidance is really focused on infrastructure planning. And I'd say that one thing I'd like to see much more in the legislation or the subsequent consultations that come forward is a real emphasis on infrastructure planning and trying to bring together the infrastructure partners and providers to all share the same vision. So see themselves as enablers for growth. rather than being possibly separate from that and seeing as garden communities as being something separate from their day jobs as infrastructure providers.
Oh, okay, interesting point. Stephen, is that a realistic future?
Look, I agree with all of that. I make 2 points, I think, really. One on the SIL issue. I think it's absolutely right to say that we haven't really quite hit the button so far, and all the mechanisms that have been used, whether it's Section 106 or SIL, in some cases mixtures of both, have somehow or another tended to undercall the amount of infrastructure investment that is needed to support the developments that take place. And I think, if I was honest, I think a succession of ministers, not just this government, but going back some time, get frustrated at the fact that this tends to then reflect itself in high land values. So landowners trouser lots of money in their view, whether that's borne out and by fact is a different matter, and then that is unfair because it is putting on the taxpayer or the wider community the requirement to provide social and economic infrastructure to support development, which actually should have been reflected in a lower land price. The second thing I think to say on the sort of whole issue of planning reform and sort of speed of delivery and joining up, which is what Jeremy was just talking about. Yes, it's a realistic thing from a planning situation and planning law reform to do. I think some of the issues that are being referred to, though, are institutional rather than legal, and you could sort of legislate and you can put through a group of legislative proposals, but that won't bring, for example, utility companies together with transport planners, with environmental planners, with social housing providers to sort of provide this nirvana of everybody singing from the same hymn sheet and coming together to develop something in its own way. And I think we do need to think, therefore, about the institutional mechanisms that enable that to happen in a real way. And Ian's experience at Ebbsfleet, I think, is one that helps that, to be honest, to happen. You've got development corporations that are able to act as catalysts for that. And they're not the only vehicles that there could be. I think mayoral development corporations have done that, for example, in Stratford in East London, and I think would be a model to use elsewhere, including in the Gateway. And so there are different things that you could do to bring that to bear, of which planning reform in itself is only a part.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to open it up to audience questions now, because we've had quite a few come in, and keep them coming, guys. I just want to ask Adam, this might be one for you to answer from your helicopter looking down. Are there major differences, this has come from Stephen Boxall, are there major differences between where the major developers want to develop and where the type of development is required? And if so, which would get the LEP funding? Oh, you're muted still.
Oh dear, I can't believe I'm the first person in this session to do that.
The curse of Zoom.
I need to have a little word with myself. In my experience of working across the LEP, I wouldn't describe there as being major differences at all. I think we've got a fairly sort of healthy dialogue going between the developers group and I guess the local authorities and others that really work with us to sort of progress schemes through our sort of funding routes. So I can think of a few projects that we've been involved in where we're everybody's come together. So generally speaking, we haven't seen an issue, we haven't seen a disconnect, but I think we're fortunate to have a sort of a fairly open and well-established dialogue across the patches. I think the way that we work is that it builds from the bottom up as well. So we have very powerful groups that operate at a county level, and they when they need to be get things on the SELEP radar and be that step more strategic, they'll come together and that'll aggregate at that SELEP level. But that's built on some very very sort of grounded local level conversations that really help the way that we work.
Absolutely, thank you. And Ian, do you want to give us a developer's perspective on that? Do you find there's discrepancies between where you'd really want to be, or where the need for thing is, or does it work quite cohesively?
I mean, I have seen that on occasions in the past. At Ebbsfleet, that's not an issue. I think where I've seen it in the past, it doesn't tend to be at a sort of big strategic level. It tends to be more, so there's an area of growth identified, and there's perhaps a discrepancy between allocation of uses within that sort of broader area. So should we have employment around that motorway junction, or should it be housing? So it tends to be more at that level. As I say, haven't really come across that as an issue in Ebbsfleet. I would sort of add one point to the earlier conversation about funding, really. And I think I was always brought up on the sort of mantra that the public sector should be putting in the minimum amount necessary to encourage the private sector to invest. So I do spend a lot of time, and my team spend a lot of time working out what the appropriate form of funding to do that is. And I think if you think about private capital that Stephen mentioned, private capital has choice of where it invests as well. And I think it's very important that if as the public sector, there is a clear plan, a clear delivery plan, clear master plan, whatever that might be, a clear local plan, and there is some clearly identified selective public investment, that's a big attractor for the private sector. So if the public sector can get those components in place, then I think you give the private sector the best chance, and it will attract, even if private capital is in more limited supply, it will be attracted towards those investment situations. So I just wanted to sort of add that as a comment to the earlier discussion, Emma.
Cool. No, thank you very much, Ian. It's really interesting. We've got time for one more audience question before I'll wrap things up with one final point to each of you. But this question from Mark Jenkinson is, Stephen earlier touched on digital infrastructure. So we've talked a lot around the roads and the trains. But what role is digital infrastructure, technology and innovation playing in the places represented, particularly in the topics of retail experience, transport, smart public places and community? Who'd like to field that one? Don't all rush.
I'm happy to have a first go. I mean, it's always been hugely important, but as I think Stephen indicated, it's going to become ever more important, and it does provide something of a challenge, I think, for planners and placemakers, because you are effectively trying to future-proof places, and so we often get challenged, and Stephen said, we might all be sitting in cars, driverless cars in the future. The trouble is they're not there now. So when you're planning places, as we are, how do you accommodate those future changes? And it's about building in flexibility, but it's the digital infrastructure is going to be huge. We probably I certainly don't understand all the ways that it's going to touch us. There's probably plenty of people out there that tell me it's going to touch absolutely everything and we should be doing this, that and the other. And sometimes actually working out exactly what you should do and what you should provide for can be just as challenging, really. But there's no doubt about it. It's already very important and it's going to become more so.
Yeah. Jeremy, how much of a part of the conversation is digital infrastructure at the council?
Really big. New developments, we are working to ensure that with initiatives that we get sort of super fast, ultra fast connectivity to all our new developments, especially our garden community, our emerging garden community. I mean, we see it as integral part, a utility that's as important as any other, really. And as we go forwards, and as was discussed earlier on, just doing this webinar as we are at the moment is only being facilitated by the fact that now we've all got much more broadband width at home or in our offices. So I think it's absolutely going to be absolutely essential. And I do agree that is going to be a network of its own right in terms of the importance of the digital going forwards, and digital being all of those facets as well. So, in terms of how autonomous cars, automation, all of those things that might come forwards through that sort of digital revolution, I think is going to play a big part. But I do take on point Ian's point, is that we need to plan straight away. So we do need to make sure that we, when we master plan, we have these things in the back of our minds, but not constraining development the here and now.
Okay, cool. And Stephen, how much money is the Treasury going to give to supporting digital infrastructure going forward in this spending review?
Luckily, I'm on mute, Emma, so you can't hear me answer that. But now I'm off mute. I mean, the answer is as little as possible, because, as you know, government policy on this is that it's delivered by the private sector, and it's a private regulated utility market. So there are, as you will all know on this call, there are areas where that doesn't work, where the market fails to deliver the right levels of engagement, and in those circumstances, government is stepping in and is providing funding through various programs to enable that to happen. So it's a very important, as everybody on this call has said, element of the equation, but it is in the same bucket as the electricity supply system or the areas of infrastructure that get water, for example, that gets provided by utility supply companies. Although technically speaking, digital infrastructure is not seen as a utility. There is an argument, I think, probably to say that many of us do see it as that way, and that it should be classed as such, and everybody should have the right of access to it. But it's that anyway. So it's a long rambling answer, and I'll shut up now.
No, it was a very interesting answer, and it sounds like there's a whole other debate to be had on another panel about whether or not that it is a utility. For now, though, we'll have to wrap up with one final point. So you've each got about a minute, and then I'm going to mute you. I won't, but keep it brief. So Adam, I'm going to start with you, and we're all going to answer the same question. What is the key driver to unlock new infrastructure for garden communities? Adam, 60 seconds, take it away.
Oh, no, I've got to go first, and everybody else can think about a perfect answer.
I know.
I think, for me, it's about making sure that the real meaningful collaboration's in place. That dialogue exists, and that everybody's, whilst they've got a different perspective, at least understands the conversation and the parameters of the conversation as well. And I would just add to that I think, certainly in our patch, I think everybody involved in that conversation, for want of a better word, needs to have confidence in those infrastructure solutions that are on stream, that are going to come forward. But perhaps worry less about the institutional architecture that sits around it, but really engage with that sense of positivity and ambition that abounds us. Oh, I've done it within a minute. Yes.
So close. I think you're about 5 seconds over, but we digress. Ian, can I come to you on that one?
Yeah, I'm gonna pick probably the thing that Jeremy picked up. It's having a clear plan and a funded plan, I suppose. So with some flexibility around funding that can be applied to different situations. So, as I said earlier, one size doesn't fit all. Sometimes it's forward funding, sometimes it's a bit of grant, sometimes it's something else. So flexibility, a clear plan, and being able to apply different forms of funding.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Jeremy, can I come on to you?
Yeah, a genuine partnership approach for me. So, a combination of private and public resource funding, and also ensuring that we recognise that, I think as others have said, infrastructure has a really wide breadth of what that means to people. And I think making sure that we don't forget about the smaller stuff, the stuff that probably has more influence to everyone's day-to-day lives, is something we probably want to ensure that we don't reset our peril. And the other thing, I think, is we were talking about this in the workshop, is that maybe to unlock some of these institutional issues, maybe there needs to be some kind of ministerial sort of influence or role to actually, in garden communities, seeing as they're taking up such a big part of the country's housing requirement going forwards, especially in the southeast. Thank you.
Brilliant. And last but certainly not least, Stephen.
So yeah, I'm going to disagree slightly, I think, with Adam, actually, because I do think the institutional architecture is important, and I think I'd probably put that at the top of my list, actually. I think in my experience, when you get that right, and you get an organisation with the right powers and the right funding and the right people and the right ability to transact, then you can deliver the right outcomes. So I agree, you've got to work out what it is you need, and there's got to be a good plan. But I would say the main thing to get right is the institutional architecture, because without that, there is no way through which the funding, public or private, can flow with confidence.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, and all really, really interesting points, and a great discussion, I think. So thank you so much to all four of you for joining me and for being honest and saying as much as you can, Stephen.
Thank you very much. Very well chaired, if I might say.
Oh, thank you very much. And yeah, with that, thank you for joining us. I'm going to hand back over to Ross from Real Estate Live, who's going to bring it home. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much, Emma. A really interesting discussion. Thanks to all of you for contributing to that. Quite difficult to keep up with the notes that I was taking, so really, really good. Thanks very much. We should be able to share with you, I think, the results of the poll from earlier. I'm hoping. There we go. Excellent. So as you can see, top of the pile, investment in social infrastructure and a skilled workforce. Quite close second, investment in transport infrastructure. You might assume that might have been the case from the title of this session, but anyway, the audience has complied and chosen the right two answers. Thank you very much. Those go into the pot for the whole of the rest of the week. I'll just remind you that the report from the roundtable, done in partnership with SELEP, the Kent Developers Group, and the Essex Developers Group, is available on the link that was posted in the chat a little earlier. Enjoy it and read it and enjoy it. Thanks again to the chair. As Stephen said, very well done, Emma. Thanks to all the speakers, excellent contributions, very much appreciated. Thanks to all the delegates for attending. We have lots more for you to go to. In about an hour, there's a session called Broken Homes with Peter Bill, former editor of EG, and Jackie Sadek, which promises to be both interesting and entertaining. And then tomorrow we have a great session on Belfast at 9 o'clock, and then a couple of sessions about innovation districts, among lots of other stuff. Go to the website at realestateliveuk.com and check them out and book in. And there's a link in the chat I see to help you do that. Thanks very much, everybody. It's time to go now, so goodbye.